Hey guys, welcome back to my tutorial, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you guys how we can start to make our CSS document and start to style our web page. Okay, so the first thing we have here is I've simply made two paragraphs, and it says look, I am size 100, and the second thing says I am green. Now after styling it, all I've done is added in my CSS, and this is what we're going to be looking at today in order to get something like this. As you can see here, I have linked my style.css document to my HTML document called test.html. If you haven't seen the first video on how to actually link your CSS to your HTML, then please go ahead and look at that. However, if you already know how, then fantastic, we can move on. If you look in my style.css document, I have something called p, font size 100 and color green. Now, the basic syntax behind this is quite simply selector followed by your property and then the value of the property. Now what do all these words mean? So your selector is simply your P, your body, your head, your HTML. These are your selectors, and all we're going to simply be doing is taking out the angular brackets. So for example, if I want to do anything to style my paragraph, I'm just going to put a P. Following the CSS syntax, the next thing I have to do is put a squiggly bracket, like this. And since I've opened a squiggly bracket, I therefore have to close the squiggly bracket. Now this is called scope. The next thing I have to do is talk about the property. Now the property is the styling attribute that I'm going to be using. So it is one aspect of the selector. So for example, if I want to change the font size, I'm going to simply type in font size, followed by a colon, as you can see here. So I've got the property followed by a colon, and then the value of the property. Now, the font size can work in EM or in pixels, or there's another one, I forgot the name of it. So let's stick with pixels for now because that's the easiest one to work with. In the paragraph, I have said that I want the size to be 100. So I'm going to put in 100 pixels. I'm going to go ahead and save this, refresh my document. Okay. So it says, look, I'm size 100. Now if I said maybe 150, then it's going to be even bigger. If I said 10 pixels, it's going to be absolutely minuscule. Okay, so as you can see, depending on how I decide to make, how big I want my font to be, it's going to change accordingly. So I can change this back to 100. And finally, at the end of it, I'm going to end my statement with a semicolon. This is so that CSS knows that I have finished with this particular property for that particular selector. For each selector, I can have multiple properties which can contain multiple values. So I'm not restricted to having to now go P and then say color blue or something. I can do it all within the same selector. So the next thing I have to do is make my color green because I'm saying that I want it to be green. In order to change your font color, we're simply going to use the property name color, spelt C-O-L-O-R, as opposed to O-U-R. And we're going to change this to green. And it's going to be followed by the semicolon at the end, and we're going to save this. And finally, we're going to close the scope at the very end to say we are done with this particular selector. So now I can remove this, save it, and refresh the page. And as you can see, it says, look, I am size 100 and I am green, which means now that for all my paragraphs that I've made, this styling has been applied to all my paragraphs. Now let's say I had a header. So H1. So this is my H1 value. This is the biggest header. And similarly, I want to go ahead and style this. What I can do now is, since I'm going to be using a different selector as in H1, I can then say H1 as my selector, open up my curly braces, and then have my next property. So for example, let me say this property is going to have, the header is going to be in italics or in bold. So I can, I'll put it into italics. So I can say H1 followed by my curly braces. So I'm following the same style as before. The property name, the selector name H1, which comes from here, followed by the curly braces. Then I'm going to have my property name, which is going to be font style, as I want this particular attribute to be in italics, and then I'm just going to put italic, followed by the semicolon at the end. Save this, go back to my page, and as you can see, well, it's not actually that big. And all I've done here is I can say this is a big ass header, and it is in italics as exactly that I wanted it. Now if I were to go to add another H1, the same thing is going to be applied. So it's going to be, this is a big ass header again. But if I were to have an H2 header, okay, nothing is going to be applied to it because I've added no particular styling to this. Okay, so that's just like the basic syntax of it. So just to recap, it's selector, followed by your property name, followed by the value of the property, where your selector is just these values, so paragraph, H1, H2, body, this kind of stuff, and then there are many more. And then your properties are any of the styling attributes that you'd like to associate with it, and then the values that go with the particular property. Okay, so that's about it. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.